welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into the dragon's news, consequences of the Gullet. Now, let's just get right into it, because I gotta tell you, I genuinely didn't expect this new chapter of the war to begin by completely shattering the emotional balance we've come to understand so far. But honestly, that is exactly what I see happening here. I want to take you on a deep, really slow-paced dive into an event that fundamentally alters every single character's trajectory. We're going to break this all down step by step, because as I sat there watching this unfold, I realized something important. What we're looking at doesn't actually feel like a fresh new beginning at all. Instead, it feels like the devastating missing final chapter of everything that came before. It's the absolute culmination of a tragedy that has been quietly building for years. Right now, everything we are seeing is about consequences. Notice how the massive spectacle of war, the big clashes we've been waiting for, is deliberately delayed. It's kind of like a brilliant movie director holding a cinematic shot just a few seconds too long, right? It builds this unbearable, suffocating sense of dread. We're forced to wait, and we're forced to witness something far more terrifying, the slow tightening of a noose. Every single promise made, every betrayal committed, and every decision these characters genuinely thought they could control has suddenly come back with just devastating force. Before the sea even starts to burn, we are looking at a world where everyone still mistakenly believes they have a plan. They are entirely unaware that the trap has already been sprung. And really, that brings me to the overarching theme I want to explore with you today, the absolute illusion of control. So, is anyone actually steering the ship? What is truly fascinating here is Rhaena and how she bonds so rapidly with the wild dragon Sheepstealer. Normally, the whole process of claiming a dragon requires this incredibly calculated patience. You need immense intelligence, and you have to earn that trust over a long period of time. I mean, dragons are ancient, living, breathing creatures with their own incredibly volatile instincts. They aren't just weapons sitting on a rack waiting to be deployed by a soldier, Yet in this moment, we see that careful traditional process completely tossed out the window by sheer desperation and circumstance. By having this bond form so quickly, Rhaena is getting a massive sudden promotion in power. Boom! She's instantly taking on a much larger role in the war ahead. But we really have to look at the historical danger here. Historically speaking, claiming a wild dragon, one that wasn't raised in the dragon pit or bonded to a rider from the cradle, is a monumentally perilous undertaking. Wild dragons do not understand human politics. They don't care about our wars. So I have to ask, is she genuinely prepared for the unpredictable consequences of what she's just inherited? Claiming a dragon of this magnitude in the heat of a fracturing world is one thing, but truly understanding the crushing weight of that responsibility, that is something entirely different. And frankly, I fear we're about to see that lack of preparation backfire horribly. Let's pivot over to Rhaenyra for a second and really examine her psychological state, because she is trapped by a completely different kind of illusion. She makes the monumental mistake of trusting Alicent, choosing to move forward despite the frantic and, let's be real, completely justified warnings of her own council. If we break this down, deep inside, I see a leader who is desperately clinging to the fading ghost of a friendship. She's remembering a time before crowns, a time before succession disputes absolutely poisoned their bloodlines. Rhaenyra wants to believe that their personal childhood relationship can somehow survive this catastrophic level of political warfare, but she's clinging to a ghost. Those memories? They belong to a world that simply no longer exists. And when we look at Alicent's side, the reality is somehow even bleaker. When I analyze her dynamic with Aemond now, I see a mother who is just entirely exhausted. Her spirit is completely broken. The storytelling here is so profound because it's all about the silence. The Red Keep has this incredibly suffocating atmosphere right now. Think about it. For years, Aemond desperately lacked his mother's affection. And now when she finally tries to offer some tiny semblance of support, it just feels hollow. It feels like a final tragic push toward an unavoidable destiny. They're running out of time to fix their fractured family, but neither of them can manage to say the words that actually need to be said. In a saga literally filled with dragons and fire, it's wild that the saddest moments still come from this deafening, unbridgeable silence. Meanwhile, King's Landing has completely devolved into a political nightmare, and it is balancing on the absolute edge of a knife. The exact moment Aemond holds a sword to Grand Maester Orwild's throat, the entire atmosphere of the capital shifts. I really need you to think about this specific dynamic. A leader who is genuinely secure in their power does not need to hold a blade to the neck of an unarmed elderly man, right? That isn't strength. That isn't even just anger. That is pure, unadulterated fear. Aemond might command armies, and yeah, he rides the most terrifying massive dragon in the sky, but as long as King Aegon is missing, Aemond's authority is incredibly brittle. I want us to really wrap our heads around Larys Strong's absolute genius here, which revolves entirely around this core concept, legitimacy. Aemond's power is absolute, sure, but only in terms of brute physical force. But Larys perfectly understands that physical force isn't enough to actually hold a throne. By secretly removing Aegon from the capital, Larys essentially neuters the Prince Regent. He totally strips Aemond of his legitimacy. Because without the recognized anointed king present, Aemond isn't a ruler. He's just an incredibly dangerous prince giving aggressive orders. It leaves his rule desperately vulnerable to anyone who simply chooses to stop believing in it.
Escaping the capital, however, definitely didn't mean escaping danger. In just an incredible twist of irony, Aegon and Larys walk straight into a trap set by House Staunton. If you recall the deep lore of this conflict, House Staunton holds a massive grudge because of the Battle of Rook's Rest. These are enemies actively, desperately seeking revenge. Yet, look at Aegon in this predicament. Even in captivity, battered, facing the grim prospect of being delivered straight to Dragonstone, he absolutely refuses to bend. His stubborn pride reveals a deeply damaged but remarkably resilient nature. For him, surrender is simply not in his vocabulary, and it just proves that sometimes unchecked pride alone is enough to destroy kingdoms from the inside out. Okay, let's shift our focus over to the ghosts of the Riverlands, specifically looking at the Red Fork. Daemon Targaryen is out here combining his unmatched, highly volatile charisma with a really dangerous unpredictability, joining forces with Riverlands and Northern soldiers. And this beautifully illustrates the utter devastation they are bringing to the Lannister forces. But what truly anchors this whole analysis for me is the presence of the dragon, Caraxes. We really have to remember who Caraxes is, the Blood Worm. This dragon carries decades of relentless bloodshed and dark history upon his back. Every single time Caraxes enters the fray, it literally feels as though the violent, inescapable past of Targaryen history itself has arrived on the battlefield to collect a terrible debt. Now, I want to vividly contrast Daemon's chaotic, violent energy with Criston Cole. If we look back at Cole in the beginning, he was totally defined by his arrogant certainty, right? His righteous indignation. But watching him march toward Harrenhal alongside Gwaine Hightower right now is a deeply unsettling experience. Cole seems spiritually dead. The horrors of his recent battles have completely hollowed him out. As his men are committing atrocities all around him, he just remains entirely detached. He moves through the murky countryside like an exhausted ghost, a man who already knows exactly how grim and inevitable his own ending is going to be. And then we arrive at Harrenhal, a location just oozing with ancient atmospheric mystery. Let's unpack the mystical side of the lore for a minute. The new dragon riders, Hugh, Adam, and particularly Ulf, are sitting around waiting for greatness, but their personalities are already twisting under the immense weight of this new power. Ulf's dangerous arrogance makes him actually believe the dragon elevates him into a literal god above humanity. But Alice Rivers? She cuts right through the superiority complex step by step. Her mockery, combined with the incredibly profound presence of the ancient green men, hints at a magic that is far, far older than the Targaryen bloodline. When she tells them history is moving elsewhere, it's a prophetic shattering of their egos. The real war is expanding quietly with figures like Daeron Targaryen, and it's passing these arrogant men right by. Then, the emotional dam finally breaks. The Triarchy launches their devastating assault at the Gullet, but I really want you to notice the brilliant, incredibly painful strategy of the commander, Sheriko Lohar. Instead of directly hitting the heavily fortified military defenses at Dragonstone, they strike high tide. We need to understand what high tide physically houses. It holds the Velaryon treasures, the artifacts of legendary voyages, literally the absolute pinnacle of their house's history. This isn't just an attack on a stone castle, it is a calculated, vicious attack on Corlys Velaryon's entire identity. Watching high tide burn is so agonizing because war is always infinitely more devastating when it targets who you fundamentally are rather than just what you defend. And while the treasures of high tide are turning to ash, an equally destructive crisis is erupting over on Dragonstone. Rhaenyra completely expects to command the immediate retaliation, but instead, her own council commits a stunning mutiny. They effectively imprison their queen. This is not just a political maneuver. This is a claustrophobic, deeply cinematic betrayal happening right under Rhaenyra's nose. It tells us exactly how rapidly faith in her leadership is eroding. As the quote perfectly encapsulates, authority only exists when people choose to recognize it. Right now, in her absolute most desperate hour, Rhaenyra's closest allies are outright refusing to see her as their commander. The profound tragedy of Rhaenyra's current state is her total, crushing isolation. I look at her situation, and it's no longer a war room, it's a prison. She isn't just fighting a war against her green enemies across the sea anymore. She is engaged in a desperate, paranoid psychological struggle against her own coalition. Every single conversation she has become a tense, layered negotiation. Every ally is now a potential rival or captor. This long, bloody fight for her birthright hasn't granted her the sovereign freedom of a ruler. No, it has locked her inside a suffocating cage of paranoia, completely stripping away her support system right at the exact moment she needs it the most. And now we reach the explosive tipping point. The tension has been building agonizingly slowly, step by step, but the terrifying reality is that dragons are about to enter a battle that has already spiraled totally out of human control. The ships are burning, families are being shattered, and above it all hangs this deeply false belief that dragons will easily solve these human mistakes. I want to make this very, very clear. Deploying a dragon in this scenario is like dropping a nuclear bomb in a tactical skirmish. We're about to see that dragons do not magically erase human errors. They magnify them exponentially. Jace arrives on Vermax and Bagheera on Moondancer, rushing into the fray with the absolute blinding confidence of youth. But raw courage means absolutely nothing without experience. The chilling realization they face as they descend is that warfare has rapidly evolved. Notice the brutal ingenuity here, the vast nets, the heavy iron chains, the massive scorpion bolts. The Triarchy soldiers down below are not terrified, unprepared peasants staring up in awe at mythical gods. They have meticulously studied these creatures. They've prepared sophisticated traps. They know exactly where a dragon is physically vulnerable, turning the massive open sky from a sanctuary into a highly lethal trap. This harsh, undeniable truth is hammered home the very moment Rhaena arrives on Sheepstealer. In a standard fantasy story, this would be the triumphant, soaring moment the cavalry arrives to miraculously save the day, right? But here, it is a living, breathing nightmare. It perfectly proves King Viserys' old, haunting warning right. Humans simply cannot master these beasts. Sheepstealer doesn't neatly distinguish between friend and foe. The wild dragon simply unleashes indiscriminate, horrifying fire upon the ships. It's a terrifying visual of the absolute lack of control Rhaena actually holds over this ancient, wild predator. From this exact moment, everything rapidly accelerates into pure, unadulterated chaos. Ships splintering into pieces, men burning alive in the churning water. The tactical formations, they are completely gone. It's just meat and fire now. Absolute panic consumes the battlefield across the rocky shore and the boiling sea. The profound arrogance of humanity, genuinely believing they can put a leash on literal forces of nature, is laid entirely bare. These dragons are not loyal foot soldiers flawlessly following complex tactical commands. They are living disasters, and when they're unleashed into an enclosed naval trap, they simply consume everything in their path. And then we witness the ultimate terror. I want to slow down and really process this horrifying cinematic moment. Amidst the uncontrolled chaos of smoke and screaming, Vermax becomes tangled. He loses altitude and violently crashes into the heavy, churning water. All the grand fantasy spectacle is instantly, violently stripped away. It's replaced by raw, intense vulnerability. The water is an entirely unnatural element for a creature born of fire. We watch the visceral panic of a mighty dragon drowning. And in that same terrifying instant, the prince is no longer a mythical god of the sky. He's just a desperate, terrified boy fighting for his next breath. Jace frantically struggles in the water. For a split second, you might actually think he'll escape, that the narrative will grant him some miraculous last-minute reprieve. But there is absolutely no plot armor here. There is no easy mercy. The Mirish archers simply raise their bows and unleash their arrows. There's no grand heroic speech. There's no slow-motion dive. There is no swelling, triumphant orchestral score telling us how we are supposed to feel. Jace is brutally cut down with shocking, cold, mechanical efficiency. It's entirely unromantic, it's devastatingly harsh, and its unflinching realism is exactly what makes it so utterly unforgettable. Jace is gone. Just let that silence hang for a moment. The silence that follows this profound realization is incredibly heavy, and it's emotionally devastating. Think about the compounding trauma Rhaenyra is enduring right now. She had already lost Lucerys to the open sky, and now the dark sea has violently taken her firstborn. She hasn't just lost a son, she has lost her chosen heir, the carefully groomed future of her entire lineage.
And I deeply believe she has lost the very final shred of hope that was keeping her tethered to her own humanity. Which brings me to my ultimate realization about everything we've just meticulously broken down. We talked at the very start about the emotional balance of the war changing. Well, this, right here, is the exact fulcrum. The Battle of the Gullet isn't just a brutal military engagement. The true beginning of this terrifying new chapter isn't the clash of massive ships or the indiscriminate fire in the sky. It is the agonizing birth of a hopelessly broken queen. The Rhaenyra who wanted peace, the woman who remembered old friendships and hesitated to strike. She's dead. She died in those freezing waters right alongside Jace. To truly conclude this analysis, we have to look at the core takeaways. We've watched the news slowly tighten. We've seen the absolute death of political legitimacy and the catastrophic shattering of the illusion that humans can control dragons. So I will leave you with this final, chilling thought to ponder. Throughout all of history and every brutal war ever fought, who is more extraordinarily dangerous than a leader who has lost absolutely everything? When a person's core humanity has been entirely burned away by unfathomable grief, there are simply no more lines they won't cross. The noose has fully tightened, the illusion of control is dead and gone, and the real terror? It's only just beginning.